In the prestigious halls of the Westfield Museum, a respected black artist faces blatant discrimination. Marcus Wilson, a seasoned artist with decades of acclaimed work, is rejected by the museum's new director Richard Cunningham for lacking sophistication and refinement. What Cunningham doesn't know is that Marcus is actually Thomas Sullivan, the anonymous creator of the museum's most valuable collection. Instead of revealing his identity immediately, Marcus begins documenting a disturbing pattern of discrimination against artists of color throughout the institution. With allies Catherine Parker and Diane Roberts, Marcus uncovers financial irregularities, manipulation of appraisals, and systematic exclusion of diverse perspectives from the museum's exhibitions. As Cunningham attempts to discredit and silence them, Marcus builds an irrefutable case that will shake the art world to its core. At the grand exhibition opening, the truth is finally revealed, forcing a powerful reckoning that transforms not just one museum, but cultural institutions across the nation. Would you stand up against discrimination if your work was rejected while your anonymous creations were celebrated? Share your thoughts in the comments below and join the conversation about art, identity, and justice. If you enjoyed this story of courage and accountability, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more powerful narratives that challenge the status quo. Marcus Wilson adjusted his silk tie as he stood before the imposing granite steps of the Westfield Museum. At 63, his salt-and-pepper hair and measured movements commanded respect in most artistic circles, but today he felt a flutter of anticipation. The portfolio tucked under his arm contained Ancestral Echoes, a piece he'd labored over for months, a mixed-media creation blending historical photographs, oil painting, and subtle textile elements that explored the evolution of Black cultural identity through 3 generations. The museum's grand marble lobby bustled with activity. Staff hung banners announcing the upcoming annual contemporary exhibition, an event known to launch careers and cement legacies. Marcus approached the reception desk, his leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the polished floor. "I have an appointment with Director Cunningham at 11, Marcus said, his deep voice warm yet professional. Marcus Wilson, the receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes, smiled. "Of course, Mr. Wilson, Director Cunningham is expecting you, 3rd floor, East Wing." As Marcus rode the elevator, he mentally rehearsed his presentation. After 30 years of acclaimed work, including commissions for corporate headquarters and prestigious public installations, this shouldn't make him nervous. Yet this particular exhibition held special significance. The Westfield had been transformed by the Sullivan Collection over the past decade, a collection created under his pseudonym Thomas Sullivan, known only to the previous director who had since retired. Richard Cunningham's office embodied the stark modernism he apparently favored: chrome, glass, and white surfaces with minimal decoration. The man himself stood as Marcus entered, tall, early 50s, with carefully styled blonde hair and a tailored navy suit that screamed old money. "Mr. Wilson, is it?" "I have 15 minutes. Cunningham's handshake was perfunctory, his gaze already drifting to the clock on his wall. "Thank you for seeing me," Marcus said, carefully placing his portfolio on the desk. "I'm submitting Ancestral Echoes for consideration in your annual exhibition." Cunningham's assistant, a black woman named Diane who appeared to be in her 30s, entered quietly with a notepad. She nodded respectfully to Marcus before taking a seat in the corner. Marcus opened the portfolio, revealing photographs of his multidimensional piece. This work explores the intergenerational dialogue between. "I'm familiar with your style," Cunningham interrupted, barely glancing at the images. "It's quite urban, isn't it? Very community-centered." Marcus noted the slight curl of Cunningham's lip. "Actually, my work has been featured in several international exhibitions focusing on postmodern expressions of historical narratives. The Guggenheim retrospective last year included." Yes, Cunningham waved dismissively. "Look, Mr. Wilson, the Westfield isn't a community center. Our patrons expect a sophistication, technical skill, contemporary relevance." From the corner, Diane shifted uncomfortably, her pen pausing above her notepad. "Perhaps you could explain which technical elements you find lacking," Marcus asked, voice steady despite the obvious dismissal. He casually removed his phone from his pocket, setting it on the desk. "Mind if I record your feedback? It's valuable for my development." Cunningham's eyes narrowed slightly. "No recordings necessary. My assessment is simple: your work lacks the refinement we're seeking. The Westfield caters to collectors with discerning tastes, not audiences looking for social commentary." "I see," Marcus said, retrieving a small notebook instead. "Would you mind specifying which aesthetic elements don't meet your standards?" "I'm particularly interested in how you define refinement in this context." Cunningham's jaw tightened. "Mr. Wilson, I don't have time to provide art lessons." "Perhaps the Southside Cultural Center would be more appropriate for your submission." Their demographic might better appreciate your perspective. Diane's eyes widened slightly at the thinly veiled racist comment. Her gaze met Marcus's briefly before returning to her notes. Marcus nodded slowly, jotting in his notebook. Interesting suggestion. And just to clarify, are these your personal observations, or does this represent the museum's official position on diversity in artistic expression? I speak for the museum in all curatorial matters, Cunningham stated flatly, standing to signal the meeting's end. Diane will show you out. We wish you luck elsewhere. As Marcus carefully returned his work to the portfolio, he noticed Diane's business card discreetly placed beside it. He tucked it away with his materials. Thank you for your time, Director Cunningham, Marcus said, his dignity intact. I look forward to attending the exhibition. I'm particularly interested in seeing how it compares to last year's showcase of the Sullivan collection. A flicker of annoyance crossed Cunningham's face at the mention of the museum's crown jewel, the very works Marcus had created. Good day, Mr. Wilson. In the hallway, Diane spoke softly. I'm sorry about that, Mr. Wilson. If you leave your contact information, perhaps I could. Of course, Marcus replied, equally quiet. I appreciate your professionalism. As Marcus descended the museum steps into the bright spring day, he made 2 phone calls, one to his lawyer, documented the interaction in detail, and another to Catherine Parker, the museum's senior curator whom he'd known for years. This wasn't just about his rejected submission anymore. It was about exposing a pattern of discrimination that had no place in the art world. The game had just begun, and Marcus Wilson was playing the long game. Marcus returned to his downtown studio, a converted warehouse space with floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the room with natural light. Canvas-covered works lined the walls, each representing decades of artistic evolution. At the far end stood his private gallery, 7 pieces from the Sullivan collection that he'd kept for himself, their bold lines and textured surfaces a testament to his versatility. He placed his rejected portfolio on his workbench and opened his laptop. With methodical precision, he began documenting the day's events, noting verbatim quotes from director Cunningham. The Sullivan pseudonym had served him well over the years, allowing his work to be judged solely on its merits rather than through the lens of racial bias. Only Thomas Reynolds, the previous museum director, knew his secret, a confidence maintained until Reynolds' retirement last year. Refinement, Marcus muttered, typing the word into his notes. Interesting choice. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine Parker. Can meet tomorrow, 2 p.m., Riverside Cafe, need to talk privately. Marcus smiled slightly. Catherine had been at the Westfield for 15 years, her curatorial expertise helping transform the once provincial museum into a respected institution. Her support of the Sullivan Collection acquisition had been instrumental, though she remained unaware of the artist's true identity. He opened his browser and navigated to the Westfield Museum's website, clicking through to the current exhibition schedule. The homepage prominently featured the Sullivan Collection, a decade of inspiration, a special retrospective planned for the fall. The irony wasn't lost on him, rejected by the same institution celebrating his work. Marcus expanded his research, methodically compiling a spreadsheet of artists featured in exhibitions since Cunningham's appointment 6 months ago. The pattern emerged clearly, a dramatic decrease in artists of color, with several prominent names conspicuously absent despite their historical relationship with the museum. His doorbell rang at 6:30 p.m. Harold Jenkins, his longtime friend and art dealer, entered carrying a bottle of scotch in takeout containers. Heard about the meeting, Harold said, setting down the food. At 67, with gray hair and round spectacles, Harold had represented Marcus for 20 years. Cunningham's reputation precedes him. You've heard things? Marcus asked, retrieving glasses from his kitchenette. Harold nodded grimly. He made similar waves at the Rosemont Gallery in Chicago, very selective about which artists received wall space. He paused, very selective about which communities deserved representation. Yet he's planning a major exhibition of the Sullivan collection, Marcus observed, pouring 2 fingers of scotch into each glass. Ah, the great unknown artist, Harold chuckled. If only he knew. They settled into leather chairs near the windows, the city lights beginning to sparkle as dusk fell. The question is, Marcus said, swirling his drink thoughtfully, how to address this systematically, not just personally. Harold raised an eyebrow. You could reveal yourself as Sullivan, that would be quite the dramatic gesture. Too easy, Marcus replied. That's personal vindication, not systemic change. Cunningham would make excuses, claim he judged each work independently. The board would be embarrassed but would likely just issue an apology and continue business as usual. Marcus rose and walked to his computer, pulling up the museum's organizational chart he'd found online. No, this requires documentation of a pattern, evidence that can't be dismissed as a misunderstanding or personal grievance. Harold nodded appreciatively. Always the strategist. What's your next move? Meet with Catherine tomorrow. She's been there long enough to have insights into the operational changes since Cunningham arrived. Marcus tapped his keyboard, bringing up the museum's exhibition submission records from previous years which he'd obtained through his connection with Reynolds. Then start contacting other artists who have been rejected recently. You're building a case, Harold observed. I'm gathering evidence, Marcus corrected. This isn't about revenge. It's about accountability and ensuring equal access to cultural institutions. His phone buzzed again, an email notification from Diane, Cunningham's assistant. Mr. Wilson, regarding today's meeting, Director Cunningham has asked me to remove all notes from the official record. This concerns me. I've worked at the Westfield for 3 years and noticed troubling patterns in submission acceptances since his arrival. If you're pursuing this further, I may have relevant information. Please be discreet, Diane Roberts. Marcus showed Harold the message. And sometimes, he said quietly, allies appear where you least expect them. Later that evening, after Harold departed, Marcus stood before his private collection. The centerpiece, Ancestral Crossroads, featured interwoven patterns representing the complex heritage of African American identity, the very piece that had launched the Sullivan collection to international acclaim. He captured a photo of the work and composed an email to Catherine with the subject line comparison point and a brief message. Looking forward to our meeting. Thought you might find this interesting, a piece with remarkable technical similarities to those in the Sullivan collection. A discussion point for tomorrow, perhaps. It wasn't a reveal, not yet. But it was the first thread in unraveling a carefully maintained charade, one that would ultimately expose more than just his identity as the celebrated anonymous artist. Tomorrow would begin the real work, systematic documentation of discrimination that could no longer hide behind subjective artistic judgment. Riverside Cafe occupied a quiet corner near the city's arts district, its patio overlooking the gentle flow of the Eastbrook River. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a secluded table partially shielded by decorative foliage. He ordered herbal tea and waited, portfolio and notebook positioned beside him, the tools of both artist and investigator. Catherine Parker arrived precisely at 2, her tall frame easily spotted as she navigated between tables. At 55, her silver-streaked black hair was pulled back in a professional bun, her attire reflecting the conservative elegance expected of the Westfield's senior curator. Marcus, she greeted him warmly, clasping his hand. It's been too long. Almost a year, he confirmed as they settled into their seats. Since Reynolds' retirement gala, their conversation remained casual until after the server had taken Catherine's order and departed. Then, leaning forward, Catherine lowered her voice. I received your email. The resemblance to Sullivan's work is remarkable, though I'd expect nothing less from someone with your expertise in mixed media composition. Her eyes held a question. But I suspect that's not why we're meeting, Marcus nodded. Yesterday's interaction with Cunningham raised concerns beyond my personal rejection. I've heard about that meeting, Catherine sighed. Diane contacted me afterward. She was quite troubled. As she should be, Marcus replied. Cunningham's comments weren't merely subjective artistic critique, they contained clear discriminatory undertones. Catherine glanced around before retrieving a tablet from her bag. This isn't the first incident. I've documented 17 submission rejections since Cunningham took over. 15 were from artists of color or those exploring themes of cultural identity. She opened a spreadsheet displaying meticulously organized data, artist names, submission dates, rejection rationales, and comparative metrics against previously accepted works. I've been tracking this systematically, she explained. The statistical deviation is too significant to be coincidental. Moreover, I've compiled the acceptance rates, predominantly white artists with connections to Cunningham's previous institutions or social circles. Marcus studied the data, impressed by its comprehensiveness. You've been preparing for this conversation, he observed. For 2 months, Catherine confirmed. I needed evidence before approaching anyone. The board trusts Cunningham. He came with impressive credentials and powerful connections. Accusations without documentation would be dismissed as professional jealousy. Their server returned with Catherine's coffee, pausing their conversation momentarily. Once alone again, Marcus shared his own findings. I've identified similar patterns in exhibition programming, he explained, opening his laptop to display his analysis. Notice the shift in thematic focus since Cunningham arrived, a 78% reduction in exhibitions addressing cultural diversity or social commentary. Catherine nodded grimly. Meanwhile, he's leveraging the Sullivan collection as the museum's centerpiece, ironically celebrating work that directly challenges the cultural homogeneity he's establishing. Marcus studied her carefully. You seem particularly invested in addressing this, Catherine, beyond professional ethics. She hesitated, then spoke quietly. My daughter-in-law is an emerging artist, Amara Johnson. Her submission was rejected last month with comments questioning her technical sophistication. She graduated summa cum laude from RISD and completed a prestigious fellowship in Paris. I know Amara's work, Marcus said. Her Diaspora in Motion series showed remarkable technical innovation. Exactly, Catherine replied, her composure briefly faltering. This isn't just institutional discrimination, it's affecting real careers, real people. Marcus considered his next words carefully. What about financial operations? Has anything changed in acquisition policies or donor relationships? Catherine's expression shifted. That's where things get particularly concerning. Cunningham has restructured reporting lines so all financial documentation routes through him before reaching the board. Several acquisitions have been fast-tracked with minimal provenance verification. She pulled up another document, a comparison of acquisition prices under Reynolds versus Cunningham. Notice these valuation discrepancies. 3 recent acquisitions from Whitmore Gallery were purchased at 30% above market value. Whitmore is owned by Charles Bennett, Cunningham's former college roommate. Have you approached the board with this information? Marcus asked. Not yet, Catherine admitted. Cunningham has cultivated strong relationships with several key members. I needed more substantial evidence, and frankly, I needed an ally with credibility in the broader art community. Marcus understood immediately. Someone like me. Your reputation is beyond reproach, Marcus. If you support these findings, others will listen. Their conversation continued, mapping out an investigation strategy. Catherine would continue documenting internal operations while Marcus would contact rejected artists to gather testimonials. They agreed to meet weekly, building their case methodically. As they prepared to leave, Marcus noticed Catherine studying the photograph he'd sent her, the Sullivan-style piece from his private collection. You know, she said thoughtfully, I've always had a theory about Sullivan's identity. The technical similarities between your work and his are striking, especially in the textural layering techniques. Marcus smiled enigmatically. Art historians have debated Sullivan's identity for years. Perhaps someday the truth will emerge. Catherine regarded him with newfound curiosity. Perhaps sooner than expected if circumstances require it. Outside the cafe, they parted with a professional handshake that conveyed deeper solidarity. Marcus walked 3 blocks before making a call. Diane, Marcus Wilson, I understand you may have information about Director Cunningham's operational practices. Perhaps we should meet. The investigation was gaining momentum. What had begun as a personal slight was evolving into a systematic examination of institutional discrimination, one that would ultimately reveal more than just Marcus's artistic alter ego. In his studio that evening, Marcus created a secure digital folder titled Westfield Accountability Project, organizing subfolders for testimonials, financial documentation, and exhibition statistics. The methodical approach reminded him of preparing for a major installation, each element carefully positioned for maximum impact when finally revealed. The pieces were coming together. Now they needed evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away, evidence that would force not just Cunningham's removal, but institutional change. Marcus coordinated their investigation with methodical precision over the next 2 weeks. His studio transformed into an operational hub, one wall covered with a timeline of Cunningham's tenure, another displaying color-coded documentation of rejected submissions categorized by artist demographics. On a Tuesday morning, Diane arrived at the studio, carrying a USB drive and manila folder. Her normally composed demeanor showed signs of stress. I've documented everything I could access without raising suspicions, she explained, spreading contents across Marcus's work table. Email correspondences, meeting minutes, and most importantly, the submission evaluation forms. Marcus examined the documents carefully. These evaluation forms, they're different from the standard protocol. Exactly, Diane confirmed. Cunningham implemented a new pre-screening process that isn't in the official guidelines. Submissions from certain artists, predominantly minorities, get routed through this evaluation while others bypass it entirely. Marcus photographed each document methodically. Can you verify when this change was implemented? Week 2 of his directorship, Diane replied. No board approval, no announcement to the curatorial team. He presented it as an administrative efficiency measure. Their conversation was interrupted by Catherine's arrival. She carried her own documentation, financial records that painted a disturbing picture. I've identified irregularities in the appraisal process, she explained, arranging spreadsheets chronologically. Look at these acquisition values for the contemporary European series purchased last month. Marcus studied the figures. These are significantly inflated. By approximately 35%, Catherine confirmed. All 6 pieces came from galleries with direct connections to Cunningham's former associates. More concerning, these inflated acquisitions have displaced budgeted purchases from diverse artists previously approved by the board. The financial trail provides concrete evidence, Marcus noted, adding the records to their growing documentation. Have you verified the authentication procedures? That's where it gets particularly questionable, Catherine said, pulling up digital records on her tablet. Several acquisitions bypass standard authentication protocols. The provenance documentation for the Whitmore Gallery pieces shows notable inconsistencies. Diane looked troubled. There's more. Cunningham has been redirecting museum resources to prepare for a private showing next month, invitation-only collectors, mostly from his personal network. Marcus processed this information, making connections between seemingly disparate elements. He's systematically transforming the museum's collection and focus, leveraging institutional resources for personal connections while excluding diverse artists and perspectives. Catherine nodded grimly, but proving discriminatory intent rather than poor judgment requires incontrovertible evidence. Their breakthrough came 2 days later when Harold connected Marcus with Jordan Matthews, a former assistant to Charles Bennett of Whitmore Gallery. Jordan provided critical testimony about pricing manipulation between Cunningham and Bennett. They explicitly discussed inflating values for mutual benefit, Jordan explained during their recorded interview. Bennett receives above-market prices for his gallery's works, while Cunningham secures first access to certain collections for his preferred private clients. By week 3, Marcus had collected testimonials from 14 artists who experienced similar discriminatory treatment during Cunningham's tenure. Among them was Amara Johnson, Catherine's daughter-in-law, whose rejection included explicit comments questioning the universal relevance of her cultural themes. Marcus organized these testimonials alongside statistical analysis, demonstrating the dramatic shift in artist representation. Copy. Pre-Cunningham exhibition demographics, previous 12 months. Artists of color, 42% of featured exhibitions. Women artists, 48% of featured exhibitions. LGBTQ+ identified artists, 23% of featured exhibitions. Post-Cunningham exhibition demographics, 6 months. Artists of color, 12% of featured exhibitions. Women artists, 27% of featured exhibitions. LGBTQ+ identified artists, 8% of featured exhibitions. In his private hours, Marcus contemplated the Sullivan identity revelation. The upcoming retrospective provided strategic timing, revealing himself as Sullivan would generate substantial media attention, creating a platform for addressing the broader institutional issues. The investigation encountered its first significant obstacle when Cunningham initiated an internal security review, restricting access to certain financial and submission records. Diane reported increasing scrutiny of her activities. "He's becoming suspicious," she warned during an encrypted video call. "He questioned why I accessed the submission archives last week." Catherine faced similar challenges. "He's rescheduled 3 acquisition committee meetings, citing documentation preparation. I believe he's altering records. We need to accelerate," Marcus decided. "His retrospective planning provides an opportunity. I can request a private tour to discuss potential contributions to the Sullivan exhibition. It would give us direct access to observe operations." The strategy worked. Cunningham, eager to cultivate relationships with potential contributors to the high-profile retrospective, personally conducted the tour. Marcus documented subtle irregularities throughout the facility, staff segregation patterns, curatorial assignment disparities, and most significantly, restricted storage areas containing recently rejected works from minority artists stored alongside acquisition documentation. Their investigation faced an unexpected complication when Cunningham's assistant, monitoring Catherine's email under his direction, discovered communication regarding their documentation efforts. Cunningham confronted Catherine privately, threatening her position. "He questioned my loyalty to the institution," Catherine reported during their emergency meeting. "Implied my curatorial judgment was compromised by political agendas and threatened to present evidence of misconduct to the board if I continued undermining museum operations." Rather than deterring their efforts, this development accelerated their timeline. Marcus contacted his attorney, providing comprehensive documentation and preparing legal options. The attorney identified multiple violations of non-discrimination policies, financial governance requirements, and potentially fraudulent appraisal practices. By month's end, their evidence was substantial. Statistical patterns demonstrating clear discriminatory practices, financial documentation showing irregular transactions benefiting Cunningham's associates, testimonials from affected artists, and internal communications revealing deliberate policy manipulations. The final piece fell into place when Diane secured access to Cunningham's private communications with board members, revealing his deliberate misrepresentation of submission quality and manipulative characterization of diverse artistic perspectives as lacking market potential and unnecessarily political. Marcus reviewed their comprehensive documentation one final time, organizing it for maximum impact. The exhibition opening was scheduled in 2 weeks, a high-profile event with board members, major donors, and press in attendance. "We're prepared," he told Catherine and Diane during their final planning meeting. "The evidence speaks for itself." What Cunningham didn't know, what would ultimately prove his undoing, was that Marcus had decided the time had come to reveal his identity as Sullivan. The revelation would serve not merely as personal vindication, but as the linchpin in exposing the profound irony and hypocrisy of Cunningham's leadership. The stage was set for a confrontation that would transform not just the Westfield Museum, but potentially establish new accountability standards across cultural institutions. As Marcus expanded his investigation, the first signs of Cunningham's counteroffensive emerged. At 8:43 a.m. on a Wednesday, Marcus received an email from the Westfield Museum's legal department. "Subject: cease and desist defamatory activities." From Bernard Walsh, Legal Counsel, Westfield Museum. To Marcus Wilson. Mr. Wilson, the Westfield Museum has become aware of your systematic collection of confidential institutional information and solicitation of staff participation in unauthorized investigations. These activities constitute potential violations of confidentiality agreements and may represent defamatory actions against Director Cunningham. We demand immediate cessation of these activities and surrender of all documentation obtained through staff communications. Failure to comply will result in legal action. Bernard Walsh, Chief Legal Counsel, Westfield Museum. Marcus forwarded the email to his attorney, Victoria Chang, who responded within the hour. "They're attempting intimidation without specific allegations. Document everything. Continue as planned." By mid-afternoon, Catherine called with troubling news. "Security revoked my access credentials to the acquisition database. Cunningham scheduled an emergency meeting with 3 board members tomorrow." Marcus implemented their contingency protocol, securing all evidence in encrypted backups. Harold activated his network of gallery contacts to monitor communications about Marcus within the art community. The counterattack escalated the following day. Marcus discovered a damaging story circulating among art blogs suggesting his recent work contained derivative elements, potentially constituting plagiarism. The source traced back to an anonymous submission from an IP address within the Westfield Museum's network. "He's attempting character assassination," Harold observed during their emergency strategy session. "Classic deflection technique." Marcus remained composed. "Document the defamation timeline, add it to our evidence file." Diane reported increased security measures at the museum. "They've implemented tracking software on staff computers and restricted access to submission archives. Cunningham personally interrogated me about accessing historical records." The most aggressive move came 3 days later when Catherine was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into improper communications with external parties. Her museum email was deactivated, and security escorted her from the building. Marcus called an emergency meeting with their core team. "Cunningham is accelerating his defensive measures," he explained. "His actions confirm he's discovered at least portions of our investigation." Their attorney presented a strategic assessment. "These defensive actions actually strengthen our case, demonstrating retaliatory behavior against whistleblowers. Each measure creates additional documentation of institutional misconduct." Marcus adjusted their timeline. "We'll proceed with disclosure at the exhibition opening as planned, but implement protective measures immediately." These measures included filing formal whistleblower protection documentation for Catherine and Diane, securing sworn affidavits from all interviewed artists, establishing secure communications protocols, preparing press packages with evidence summaries. The following morning, Marcus received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Westfield board member Alina Richards, speaking cautiously. "Mr. Wilson, I've been made aware of potential concerns regarding Director Cunningham's operational decisions. The board has received contradictory information. Perhaps we should discuss this privately." Marcus recognized both opportunity and potential trap. I appreciate your outreach, Ms. Richards. However, given recent legal communications from the museum, I believe any discussion should include my legal representation. A strategic meeting was arranged at his attorney's office, where Marcus presented a carefully curated subset of evidence, focusing on financial irregularities rather than discrimination patterns, issues that would directly concern board fiduciary responsibilities. Richards appeared genuinely troubled. These acquisition discrepancies are concerning. However, Cunningham has characterized your investigation as personal retaliation for a rejected submission. The evidence spans 6 months of systematic pattern, Marcus replied calmly. My rejection occurred 3 weeks ago. Richards departed with copies of financial documentation, promising to review the materials confidentially. 2 days before the exhibition opening, Cunningham made his most aggressive move yet, contacting Marcus directly. Your campaign of misinformation ends now. Security will prevent your access to the exhibition. Additionally, I've informed the board about your unauthorized possession of a Sullivan-style piece, raising serious questions about potential forgery. The accusation of forgery, particularly regarding his own work, would have been amusing under different circumstances. Instead, it provided the final element needed for their strategy. Marcus responded with measured confidence. Director Cunningham, I look forward to discussing the provenance of my Sullivan piece at the exhibition opening. The authentication should prove quite illuminating. With Cunningham's increasingly erratic defense, Marcus finalized their disclosure plan. The exhibition opening would provide the perfect stage for revealing both his identity as Sullivan and the comprehensive evidence of Cunningham's misconduct, a strategic confrontation that would leave no room for deflection or denial. The Westfield Museum's annual exhibition opening represented the pinnacle of the city's cultural calendar. Floodlights illuminated the neoclassical facade as guests in formal attire ascended the marble staircase. At precisely 7:30 p.m., Marcus arrived, his tailored charcoal suit complemented by a subtle gold pin, a miniature replica of the signature element in every Sullivan piece. Inside the grand foyer, servers circulated with champagne and canapés while string quartet music provided elegant ambience. Board members, major donors, and art critics mingled beneath crystal chandeliers, each conversation potentially pivotal to the institution's future. Catherine stood near the east entrance, having defied her administrative leave to attend as the guest of board member Alina Richards. Their carefully orchestrated presence established strategic positioning throughout the venue. Diane monitored the staff entrance, providing real-time updates via secure messaging. Harold engaged key journalists, priming them subtly for the evening's unexpected developments. At 8:15 p.m., Richard Cunningham approached the podium, his confident demeanor betraying no awareness of the impending revelation. Distinguished guests, welcome to our annual exhibition opening, he began, voice resonating through the marble hall. Tonight celebrates artistic excellence and the Westfield's commitment to showcasing the finest contemporary work. Marcus observed from the periphery, mentally reviewing their strategy while Cunningham continued. Our institution stands for quality, sophistication, and artistic integrity, values exemplified by our crown jewel, the Sullivan Collection, which we'll celebrate with a comprehensive retrospective this fall. The irony wasn't lost on the assembled team. Marcus activated their coordinated approach, moving deliberately toward the central gallery where Cunningham held court with board members and prominent donors. Director Cunningham, Marcus greeted him with professional courtesy, a momentous evening for the Westfield. Cunningham's composure faltered momentarily. Mr. Wilson, I believe my communication was clear regarding your attendance. Indeed it was, Marcus replied calmly. Yet as a dedicated patron of the arts and contributor to this institution, my presence seems appropriate, particularly given our shared appreciation for Sullivan's work. Board President Henrietta Blackwell interjected, You're acquainted with Mr. Wilson, Richard? Before Cunningham could respond, Alina Richards approached with Catherine. Mr. Wilson was discussing some concerning financial documentation with several board members this week, Richards explained. We've been reviewing acquisition procedures that show troubling irregularities. Cunningham's expression hardened. This is hardly the venue for unfounded allegations based on incomplete information obtained through improper channels. Perhaps we should discuss what constitutes improper channels, Marcus suggested, retrieving a tablet from his jacket. I've documented systematic discrimination against artists of color since your appointment, alongside financial improprieties and acquisitions from your personal associates. Museum patrons nearby grew quiet, attention drawn to the intensifying exchange. Cunningham attempted damage control, lowering his voice. These baseless accusations reflect personal grievance after your submission was rejected on artistic merit alone, he said tersely. Security will escort you out. Marcus remained composed as two security officers approached. Before that occurs, I should clarify one critical misunderstanding about my unauthorized possession of a Sullivan-style piece. The security officers hesitated, uncertain whether to intervene during this increasingly public confrontation. Thomas Sullivan, Marcus stated clearly, is my professional pseudonym. I am the creator of every piece in the Sullivan collection. The declaration landed with seismic impact. Conversations ceased throughout the gallery as attendees processed this revelation. A journalist who had been briefed by Harold began recording discreetly. Preposterous, Cunningham sputtered. Sullivan's identity has remained confidential for over a decade. A confidentiality maintained through legal agreements with former director Reynolds, Marcus explained, who can validate my identity. Documentation exists in the museum's sealed records, records you've recently restricted access to. Board President Blackwell's expression reflected growing concern. Is this accurate, Richard? This is theatrical misdirection, Cunningham insisted. A desperate attempt to. Perhaps this will clarify matters, Marcus interrupted, retrieving a second tablet containing a prepared presentation. This shows the preliminary sketches for Ancestral Crossroads, the cornerstone of the Sullivan collection. Authenticated provenance documentation is available for board review, along with verification from Director Reynolds. Marcus advanced through images documenting his creative process for the collection's signature works, evidence impossible to fabricate. Each slide further undermined Cunningham's credibility, while gallery patrons gathered to witness the unfolding revelation. The profound irony, Marcus continued, addressing the growing audience, is that Director Cunningham rejected my recent submission while simultaneously planning a retrospective celebrating my work created under a pseudonym, work exploring the very cultural themes he dismissed as lacking sophistication and refinement. Catherine stepped forward. This revelation, concerning as it is, represents merely the surface of systematic discrimination under Director Cunningham's leadership. She distributed prepared folders to board members, containing comprehensive documentation of rejection patterns, financial irregularities, and testimonials from affected artists. We've verified and corroborated all evidence through multiple sources, Catherine explained professionally. The statistical patterns reveal deliberate exclusion based on racial and cultural factors, alongside financial transactions benefiting Director Cunningham's associates at above-market valuations. The carefully orchestrated disclosure continued as Harold guided key art critics toward the documentation. Diane ensured security personnel received accurate information about the authorized presentation of evidence to board members. As the exhibition opening transformed into an impromptu reckoning, Marcus watched Cunningham's facade crumble beneath the weight of meticulously gathered evidence and the irrefutable revelation of the Sullivan identity. The stage was set for institutional transformation, not through dramatic confrontation, but through methodical exposure of discriminatory practices that could no longer hide behind subjective artistic judgment. The Westfield Museum's emergency board meeting convened at 9 a.m. the morning after the exhibition opening. Sunlight streamed through the conference room's tall windows, illuminating the sober faces of 14 board members seated around a mahogany table. Marcus sat between his attorney and Catherine, facing the board directly. Board President Henrietta Blackwell called the meeting to order with uncharacteristic gravity. Given the extraordinary circumstances revealed last evening, we've assembled to address serious allegations regarding Director Cunningham's leadership and decision-making practices. Cunningham sat opposite, flanked by the museum's legal counsel. His normally commanding presence appeared diminished, his defensive posture evident in crossed arms and tight jaw. For clarity and documentation purposes, Blackwell continued, this meeting is being recorded. Let the record show all voting board members are present. The systematic review proceeded methodically. Marcus and Catherine presented their evidence chronologically, referencing specific policy violations alongside statistical patterns. The board reviewed acquisition records revealing the 35% price inflation on purchases from Cunningham's associates, followed by documented rejection patterns demonstrating clear demographic disparities. These rejections, Catherine explained, displaying comparative metrics on the presentation screen, cannot be justified by quality assessment. Several rejected artists maintain exhibitions at institutions with more rigorous submission standards than the Westfield. Board member Alina Richards addressed Cunningham directly. These financial discrepancies are particularly concerning from a governance perspective. Can you explain the justification for paying significantly above market value for the Whitmore Gallery acquisitions? Art valuation is inherently subjective, Cunningham responded defensively. These pieces represented strategic additions to our permanent collection with significant appreciation potential. Yet 3 independent appraisers have valued these acquisitions at substantially lower figures, Marcus noted, distributing the verification documentation. Moreover, their acquisition displaced previously approved purchases from diverse artists, purchases specifically budgeted by this board. The questioning continued for over 2 hours, each piece of evidence further eroding Cunningham's position. When presented with his own emails discussing how to maintain aesthetic standards by limiting urban perspective pieces, his explanations grew increasingly convoluted. At 11:45 a.m., the board requested a private deliberation. Marcus, Catherine, and their team waited in an adjacent room while Harold monitored media coverage of the previous night's revelation. Sullivan identity was trending nationally, with art publications scrambling to analyze the implications. At 1:20 p.m., they were recalled to the boardroom. Blackwell's expression reflected the board's determination. After thorough review, the board has reached several unanimous decisions, she announced formally. First, Richard Cunningham's employment as museum director is terminated effective immediately with cause. Cunningham started to protest but was silenced by his attorney's restraining hand. Second, Blackwell continued, the board extends a formal apology to all artists who experienced discriminatory treatment during the submission process. Full review of all rejections will be conducted by an independent committee. She turned directly to Marcus. Third, we acknowledge Marcus Wilson as the artist Thomas Sullivan and express profound institutional regret for the rejection of your recent submission, which will be included in the upcoming exhibition. The board proceeded to outline comprehensive remediation measures. 1. Establishment of an external ethics committee to oversee future acquisition processes. 2. Implementation of blind submission evaluation protocols. 3. Comprehensive diversity audit of collection and exhibition history. 4. Immediate reinstatement of Catherine Parker, with expanded curatorial authority. 5. Public acknowledgement of institutional failures and commitment to remediation. Marcus listened attentively, recognizing these measures addressed systemic issues rather than merely providing personal vindication. When invited to address the board, he spoke reflectively. The Sullivan pseudonym served its purpose, allowing my work to be judged solely on artistic merit rather than filtered through preconceptions. Today's outcome isn't about personal recognition but institutional accountability. Art belongs to everyone, and our cultural institutions must reflect diverse perspectives and experiences. The formal proceedings concluded with the establishment of implementation timelines and accountability mechanisms. As the meeting adjourned, Marcus found himself surrounded by board members expressing both appreciation for his methodology and genuine remorse for the institutional failures. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood in the Westfield's Grand Gallery surveying the installation of a new exhibition, Identity and Creation, the works of Marcus Wilson and Thomas Sullivan. The exhibition featured his works created under both names, alongside pieces from previously rejected artists. Catherine approached, now serving as acting director while a formal search process proceeded. The response has been extraordinary, she reported. Attendance has doubled, and we've received unprecedented media coverage. More importantly, Marcus observed, applications for the next submission cycle have increased by over 60%, primarily from artists of color and those exploring cultural identity themes. The exhibition's centerpiece featured a newly commissioned installation created collaboratively by Marcus and 5 previously rejected artists, symbolizing the transformative potential of institutional accountability. In his studio that evening, Marcus completed final revisions to his keynote address for the upcoming National Museum Directors Conference, titled Institutional Accountability in Cultural Spaces. The Sullivan revelation had created a platform for addressing broader systemic issues across the art world. His phone buzzed with messages from emerging artists seeking mentorship, cultural organizations requesting consultation on evaluation protocols, and board members from other institutions proactively reviewing their own practices. The reckoning had transcended a single institution, catalyzing examination of discriminatory patterns throughout the cultural establishment. Marcus recognized that true justice wasn't found merely in Cunningham's removal, but in the systemic transformation his actions had precipitated, creating pathways for diverse voices to contribute to the artistic dialogue for generations to come. As he placed the final touches on ancestral echoes, now prominently displayed in the Westfield's main gallery, Marcus reflected on the journey from rejection to institutional change. The artwork itself had evolved, incorporating elements representing resilience, accountability, and transformation, a visual testament to the principle that justice achieved creates ripples extending far beyond individual vindication. The true masterpiece wasn't hanging on the gallery wall, but embodied in the institutional transformation that would ensure equal access to cultural spaces for all artists, regardless of their identity or background.